Hi again, Mark here from TalkingBass.net. This week I'm going to respond to quite a few emails that I've been getting with regards to this Fender bass. Now, I generally use two basses on the videos, this Fender Jazz, which is a Marcus Miller Signature Edition, and that blue Ibanez SR1000 that you might have seen. Now, the Fender gets a lot of comments because people tend to notice a few of the modifications that I've made, you know, with all these knobs and things. So I'm going to be going over all that, but first of all, let's just take a look at the bass. So this is the older made in Japan version. The newer versions are made in Mexico, and there's quite a few differences which I'll point out as I go along. So you just want to bear that in mind if you're looking to buy one. So let's start with the body. It's made of ash and it's a fairly big chunk of wood, so it does weigh a fair bit. It's a copy of Marcus Miller's 1977 Fender Jazz, and I think a lot of basses in those days were built like tanks. When I first bought this one, I was working on a cruise ship and playing anything between 5 and 7 sets every day, and that was for like 6 months at a time, so it soon started to wear on my shoulder. Apparently the new Mexican models are a bit lighter, but if you're doing anything like the gig that I just mentioned, make sure to get a decent strap, otherwise you'll find yourself playing on stage like this, which is what I ended up doing. As for the rest of the bass, it's got a maple fingerboard, as you can see. It's got 20 frets, and it's got a fairly chunky neck that I wouldn't really describe as fast, but like everything on this bass, it's strong and reliable. It's got big square fret markers there and little dots down the sides, so you always know where you are. And the whole bass has a bit of a nice balanced feel. It's not headstock heavy in any way. It's, it just feels right. The tuners are the standard Fender style there, although I do have a Hipshot Detuner on the low E, which I'll come to in a minute. It's a standard 34-inch scale, or long scale. It's got a nice badass 2 bridge there, which is really good for little adjustments, and it's also got a bullet truss rod nut up here that's really handy, so I don't have to start unscrewing things if I want to make adjustments on the fly, which I do from time to time, so that's really handy. And it used to have this cool retro style pickup guard down here, which you've probably seen on all the photographs of these things. But I took that off because it's got a lot of nice tones around here, around this neck pickup here. You're pretty limited when you've got it on to playing up here in this kind of Stanley Clarke and Marcus Miller-y kind of style up here, or going back here and just sitting on that on the bridge pickup. But there's a lot of tones behind there that are really, really nice, and I was really craving them when I had it on, so I took it off, and it doesn't look as cool, but I get a lot of those tones that I really wanted. Now, it's also got this big 3-piece black scratch plate. Now, this is the main plate that the electronics are all hidden behind, and the battery is hidden behind this bottom little scratch plate down here. So you do have to get the screwdriver out to change the battery, which I hate, okay? I mean, I've had loads of basses where you have to do that, and I really hate it. But apparently in the new Mexican version, there's a battery compartment around the back with no screws. So hooray, that you just, take it out, pop one back in. So that's great. The stock pickups are vintage American Fenders. The stock electronics have 2 volumes, one for each pickup, like the regular passive Fender Jazz, but it's got additional treble and bass controls. Now, as you can see, I don't have stock pickups or electronics, so I'll move on to that in a sec. The stock pickups were great sounding and the electronics were fine, so don't think that the pimping of this thing is a reflection of bad sound or anything. It's just that I needed more diversity on specific gigs, and the changes that I made were out of necessity for me, so it wasn't really pimping for pimping's sake, so don't think that if you buy one of these stock it's not going to be very good. It was great and I just changed it. So overall, I must admit, I do love this bass. It's my main workhorse gigging bass, and it's got a great fundamental depth to the tone that's great for pretty much any style. A stock with all stock parts, you can get that dark round Marcus Miller tone, and backed off onto the bridge pickup you can get that growly Jacko tone, and you can get loads of tones in between. Now, when I mention that fundamental depth to the tone, I mean it sounds really big on recordings. I mean, you get a real sense of the fundamental rather than that middly punchy sound that you get with basses like the Ibanez, for instance. Play a ballad with this thing and you get a lovely warm tone with a real great sustain. It's got that real lovely, just fundamental, like I say. For me, I'd say the pros are the natural sound of the bass, the look of it, especially with that pick guard, and the strong tank-like build, and also the badass bridge that I do prefer a lot more to the the standard Fender vintage bridges. The cons for me would probably be the weight. It's pretty heavy, and even though I do love that strong, reliable tank-like feel, my back has definitely suffered from it over the years. The battery compartment, which has now been rectified, is also a bit of a problem for me, and also there's a certain downside to the single coil pickups, which I'll now address along with all those modifications. So I bought this bass and it worked out great for a while, but I was doing a lot of sideman work backing a lot of cabaret acts in a kind of theatre setting. And it was under a lot of lighting, and the single coil pickups would pick up a lot of noise, especially if I soloed either of them. So my first modification was to buy some new hum cancelling pickups, and I settled on these Dimarzio Ultra Jazz pickups, and they've been great. They've got a nice fat sound, if a little scooped in the middle, but it just so happens that this scoop actually worked out really well for me. It's got a really great slap tone because of it, and it also helped mellow out the sound of the Schroeder bass cabinet that I'd got, which is very, it's got a bit of a punchy hump in the lower mids. It's a great cap, but this did counteract a little bit of that hump when I was just playing, unaccompanied, let's say. So that helped with a lot of the noise side of things, but I was also getting a little bit annoyed at the dual volume pots. And I always found that my favourite sound was between the two extremes of the bridge and the neck pickups. So I'd always find a volume setting that I really liked, and then, as most people do, I'd turn the volume off right, between songs on stage to avoid any noises and accidents. Then when I had to turn back up again, I'd get annoyed with trying to find that sweet spot again. I also didn't really like turning down two volume controls, and I know that's the standard Fender Jazz way, but I was used to a single volume control and a pickup blend, so I was really craving for that again. So after looking around, I eventually found this amazing John East preamp that's intended especially for this Marcus Miller bass. The circuit board's attached to the back of the scratch plate, so you get a new scratch plate, and then it just fits straight in. And it's awesome. I've got 3 stacked pots now, these concentric pots. The first one's a single volume control on the top, and that solves the problem right there, the 2 volume pots. Then the bottom knob is a pickup selector, so hooray, I'm back with my familiar way. So that's the problem solved there. Then I've got the treble and bass controls here. So they're stacked, so I've got treble and bass. And then the next pot is a parametric mid. So there's no mid controls on the original stock electronics. This is specifically, for this particular preamp. And it's got a frequency selector on the bottom knob, and then a boost and cut on the top knob. Then finally, this knob down here is the passive tone control, just as you'd have on the standard, so it's not in the electronics, that's just passive. Then you've got these 2 switches. One of them is a passive active switch, so if the battery runs out, I can just flick it into passive mode, which is great. And then the other switch is when I'm in passive mode, of course there's no pickup selector because I don't have 2 volume controls. So this switches between bridge pickup and both pickups. There's no neck pickup selection, it's just bridge and both flat out. But it's fine, and to be honest, I just have them both flat out if I go into passive mode. So yeah, so it's a great preamp. So that's the electronics, but I've also got another mod up here at the E-string tuning peg where I fitted a Hipshot Detuner. Now if you haven't seen any of these before, they're simply modified tuning pegs with a little lever here that you can flip to jump to a different tuning. You set the tuning as you want with a little screw that's in the back. I've currently got it set to E flat, so there's an E, flick it down to E flat, and back up to an E, okay? Since I've bought it, I've used it quite a lot. It's great for making up for the lack of a low B string if I don't have a 5 string with me. And I also like to sometimes just drop the Hipshot at the end of tunes, you know, for that last note, so I can hit a low note. So depending on what the key is, obviously. So sometimes I'll set it to D or C or E flat or whatever. So let's say it's in E flat like this is. Let's say the tune's in E flat, it comes to an E flat at the end, and just flick it with the thumb and then hit that low E flat. So yeah, it's a pretty useful buy. So that's my modified Fender Jazz. It's a great bass. I don't think I'll ever sell it. It's perfect for most standard gigs, and I definitely recommend it to anyone looking for a good all-round bass. Of course, I'd also recommend that Johnny's preamp. It's a great addition to any bass and has an amazing amount of diversity, especially with that parametric mid. So I hope that answered some of your questions, and I'll be back with more lessons as normal next week. See you later.